All right, let's dive into this explainer and explore a story that takes us right to the very edge of human sanity. We're looking at a piece of literature that doesn't just tell an adventure story, but actually holds up a deeply unsettling mirror to society. It really asks us to confront what actually lies underneath our civilized exterior.
Now, you might already be familiar with the iconic film Apocalypse Now, right? The one that unpacks the hypocrisy and emptiness of the American war effort in Vietnam. Well, what's genuinely fascinating is that the movie directly lifts its primary plot and major themes from an 1899 novella called Heart of Darkness. So even though the settings are decades and literally continents apart, shifting from the 19th century Belgian Congo all the way to the Vietnam War, the core exploration of madness, unchecked power, and the sheer darkness within the human soul, that remains exactly the same.
Section 1. Context and the Congo. To truly grasp this intense plunge into the unknown, we first need to look at the man who actually lived it. Joseph Conrad's life was, frankly, completely wild. Just think about this. He went from being a Polish orphan by the age of 12, whose parents died in exile, to traveling to Marseille to become a sailor. Eventually, in 1890, he found himself commanding a steamship in the Belgian Congo. And this is absolutely crucial, because it means his surreal and terrifying story isn't just pure fiction made up in a comfortable room somewhere. It's deeply grounded in his own first-hand experience. He actually navigated those rivers. And 9 years later, in 1899, he publishes Heart of Darkness, writing it entirely in English, which, amazingly, was his third language.
To put Conrad's journey into perspective, we have to understand the historical backdrop. During the late 19th century period known as the Scramble for Africa, European nations were ruthlessly competing for colonial wealth. They claimed to the public that they wanted to civilize the continent. But, as the source material makes painfully clear, their actions were driven entirely by greed. The Belgian Congo, controlled as the personal property of King Leopold I, was notorious for being one of the absolute most brutal of these colonies.
Section 2. The absurd quest begins. Our explainer follows a character named Marlowe on what is essentially an inverted hero's quest. You know, normally a hero goes through trials to find some fundamental truth or enlightenment. But Marlowe's journey, it leads to complete absurdity.
Marlowe's physical journey perfectly mirrors a psychological one. He starts off leaving the calm, civilized Thames River in England, travels to the company headquarters in Europe, and then heads deeper and deeper into the African jungle. He hits the outer station, hikes to the central station to fix a sunken steamship, and finally navigates his way upriver to the elusive inner station. And with every single step forward, he is stepping further and further away from the rules and reality of European civilization.
And the things he witnesses on this trip are incredibly bizarre. Like along the coast of Africa, Marlowe spots a French man-of-war anchored in the ocean, just firing aimlessly into the immense, empty continent. There's no enemy anywhere in sight, just a ship shelling the bush. It's a perfect anecdotal illustration of the absolute irrationality of the European presence. In the face of this massive African landscape, their giant guns are reduced to a tiny projectile, giving a feeble screech, and nothing happens. It is sheer absolute absurdity.
So the crucial takeaway here is that instead of grand civilizing missions, Marlowe finds overwhelming emptiness. He encounters staggering waste, sheer incompetence, machines just left out to rust in the sun, and a bizarrely disconnected reality where men are just wandering aimlessly. The Europeans are chasing grand ideals on paper, sure, but on the ground, their whole endeavor is exposed as hypocritical, negligent, and entirely lacking in any coherent goals.
Section 3. The hollowness of civilization. This profound disconnect that Marlowe witnesses unpacks a huge theme from the source material.
Even before Marlowe leaves Europe, he visits the unnamed European city housing the company headquarters, and he describes it as a whited sepulchre, which, if you don't know, literally means a hollow tomb. This imagery is incredibly potent, setting up the central metaphor for the whole entire story.
It brilliantly illustrates exactly what Conrad is getting at. On the outside, you have this beautiful white exterior, right? It represents lofty ideas, the civilizing mission, polite society. But the inside? The inside is hidden and utterly hollow. It represents the hypocrisy, the sheer greed, the ruthless desire for power, and essentially the decaying dead. European civilization is presented as a mask. It's a shiny exterior hiding a very dark, corrupt core.
Section 4. Finding the monster. So what actually happens when that mask gets ripped off? At the very end of the river, deep in the inner station, Marlowe finally meets the antagonist he's been obsessing over his entire journey, a
a man named Kurtz.
When we contrast these two figures, a pretty chilling picture emerges. Marlowe is a pragmatic seaman. He's skeptical, but he survives the madness of the jungle because he strongly believes in the grounding reality of hard work. It keeps him sane. Kurtz, on the other hand, was supposed to be the absolute best of European civilization. Incredibly talented, ambitious, marked for greatness. Yet, when Marlowe finally finds him, Kurtz has warped into a brutal god to the local natives. He's performing terrible rites and has completely abandoned his morals.
So how on earth does a supposedly great man fall so far? Well, Marlowe theorizes it's due to what he calls the fascination of the abomination. Out there, in the utter solitude of the jungle, without a policeman, without the superficial restrictions of civilized society or public shame to keep you in check, a man is plunged into a world where his darkest impulses are unleashed. Without those guardrails, he simply gives in to the mad desire for power.
Unable to combat those internal urges, Kurtz literally becomes exactly what the sepulchre represented, a hollow monster. Ultimately, as he dies on the boat trip back, his iconic final words are, "The horror, the horror." And that is a final, crushing realization. It's an ultimate judgment passed on himself, on the brutal things he committed, and on the hypocritical European world that created him. He finally sees the true emptiness of the whole shebang.
Section 5. A Complicated Legacy. Now we must impartially look at the fierce debate scholars and critics have over the text itself, which continues to this very day.
There is a very deep critical divide over how to interpret this work. On one side, you have the anti-colonial argument. Proponents here point out that the book ruthlessly attacks the hypocrisy and brutality of white colonizers, exposing them as totally corrupt. It flips the script, equating whiteness with trickery and mass destruction. However, on the other side, you have the racist foundation argument. These critics forcefully argue that, sure, while attacking colonialism, the novel relies heavily on a deeply patronizing foundation, treating Native Africans as primitive objects or symbols rather than complex thinking individuals. Both of these perspectives offer vital, essential lenses through which we have to evaluate the novella today.
As Marlowe's failed quest comes to an end, we are left with something incredibly potent to ponder. He didn't find enlightenment in the jungle. He found a hollow core. So, I leave you with this question. Is there a fundamental truth to human nature, or is everything we call civilization simply a fragile mask hiding the darkness within us all? It's an uncomfortable realization about our own human condition, but definitely one that ensures this story will never, ever be forgotten.